Hi, and welcome to Sleepy Roman History. If you're listening to this at night, I hope it helps you unwind. Please like and subscribe. It means so much to me. Where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it? It's so nice to think that wherever we are, we're sharing this moment together. The air in Rome on the morning of March 15th was quiet and still. The sun had only just begun to rise over the tiled rooftops, casting long, pale slivers of golden light between the columns of marble porticos. Street vendors were slowly setting up their stalls, their motions unhurried, their voices hushed. The paving stones were cool beneath their sandals, still holding the memory of night. Inside the city's heart, the Curia of Pompey stood silent. It had been chosen for a special meeting of the Senate, away from the traditional Curia Julia, which was still under renovation. The hall was austere and cool inside, its walls plain, its rows of benches empty for now. A gentle breeze stirred the curtains near the windows, letting in thin beams of daylight and the faint scent of olive trees and city dust. Julius Caesar awoke in his home on the Via Sacra with a mind filled not with worry but with habit. He had known many mornings like this. Though the Ides of March had been marked by superstition for centuries, it was just another date on the calendar to him. He was consul, dictator perpetuo, master of the Roman world. Today's meeting was just one more step in his endless schedule of decrees, reforms, and careful management of power. Servants moved quietly around his villa, lighting small lamps and setting out a modest breakfast. There were olives, a little bread, and a dish of dates, all arranged with care. Caesar's personal physician, a Greek named Antistius, offered him warm water infused with herbs to settle the stomach. The dictator accepted it without comment. His mood was quiet, reflective. Outside, his wife Calpurnia lingered in the atrium, wrapped in a fine shawl. Her brow was furrowed. She had woken from troubled dreams and felt uneasy, though she tried not to show it. She watched the light shift along the floor mosaics and listened to the murmur of household staff. When Caesar approached her, she touched his arm gently and asked if he might stay home today, just for the morning, just until the feeling passed. He smiled at her concern and gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. Then he stepped into the street with his entourage, his white toga catching the morning sun. His lictors, bearing their bundles of rods, walked ahead of him as a small crowd of admirers gathered along the road, murmuring greetings and praises. Along the route to the Curia, the forum was slowly awakening. Pigeons fluttered on the rooftops, and the fountains splashed softly in their basins. The marble statues of gods and heroes stood in solemn silence as the city moved gently around them. The smell of fresh bread and olive oil wafted from a nearby bakery, mixing with the scent of damp stone and laurel. As Caesar's party passed the temple of Venus Genetrix, a man stepped forward. He was aged and wrapped in a worn cloak. In his hand was a scroll. Artemidorus, a philosopher and teacher, had written a warning. Names of conspirators, details of plots. He tried to press the scroll into Caesar's hand, urging him to read it immediately. But Caesar only nodded and passed it to an aide. There would be time for such things later. The journey continued. And in the Curia, the senators were beginning to arrive. Each footstep echoed softly through the hall. Each robe rustled gently as it swept the stone floor. A slow calm descended over the scene. The morning moved forward, quiet and unchanged, unaware of what the day would bring. The shadows inside the Curia of Pompey grew shorter as the morning light crept higher in the sky. Within the chamber, senators arrived one by one, their footsteps quiet on the stone, their expressions carefully composed. Most wore the simple white toga with a purple stripe that marked their rank, though a few chose garments of finer fabric, crisp and recently pressed, showing signs of cautious preparation. The air was still cool inside the curia, with only the occasional flutter of a curtain or the soft sound of a clearing throat to disturb the quiet. Conversations were low and measured. Some senators nodded politely as they passed one another, exchanging murmured greetings. Others avoided each other's gaze, finding comfort in the ritual of habit. Each man took his place along the benches, settling into the familiar rhythm of senatorial order. Cassius Longinus stood near one of the tall windows, his hands folded behind his back. The light caught the edge of his jaw, illuminating the tension in his face. He did not speak. His eyes moved slowly around the room, watching as more figures entered, as more pieces of the plan quietly fell into place. His companion, Marcus Junius Brutus, lingered a little farther back, speaking briefly with a senator from the countryside. His words were gentle, his manner calm, though his fingers drummed faintly against the carved edge of the bench. There had been meetings in secret chambers, letters written and burned, promises made beneath the soft glow of oil lamps, long after the city had fallen asleep. Each man who joined the conspiracy had his reasons. Some feared tyranny, others missed the old republic. A few hungered for power of their own. And yet, none of that showed now. In the daylight, with the Senate gathering and the dictator on his way, all was quiet purpose. Simba arrived, his brow furrowed and his stride steady. Decimus followed not long after, nodding politely to the guards stationed at the entrance. The scent of old parchment and beeswax polish lingered in the room. The senators sat in silence, as they often did before a session began, the hush filled only by the rustle of togas and the soft clink of rings against wood. Outside, the forum hummed with life. A soft wind moved through the colonnades, stirring leaves that had fallen from a laurel wreath. A group of children played near the base of a statue, their laughter carrying faintly into the hall. The distant sound of chariots along the Via Sacra drifted through the windows, far off and rhythmic. In the curia, Brutus sat quietly, his eyes fixed on the floor. A scribe entered briefly to lay a scroll on the central table, then withdrew without a word. The benches creaked as men shifted, adjusting their robes or glancing toward the door. A faint cough echoed once. Then silence returned. The meeting had not yet begun, but it would, soon. And with it, something would end. The senators waited, each with their own thoughts, each wrapped in the stillness of that quiet Roman morning. The sun now reached higher, brushing the rooftops of Rome with a soft amber hue. Birds flitted among the eaves of temples, their wings rustling gently through the warm air. Along the Via Lata, the crowd stirred as Julius Caesar's entourage moved steadily forward. Lictors cleared a respectful path, their fasces glinting faintly in the sunlight. A few bystanders whispered quietly to one another, watching the procession pass as though it were a daily pageant, something seen often, yet always worth pausing for. Caesar's face was composed, his eyes thoughtful. He responded with faint nods to the greetings around him, though his mind seemed to wander. The warmth of the day touched his shoulders, and the folds of his toga hung neatly, undisturbed by wind or haste. At his side, a few trusted aides walked in silence, the sound of their sandals faint against the stones. One of them, Faberius, held the scroll given by Artemidorus. It had been forgotten in the flow of movement and conversation. Tucked beneath other documents, it rested unread. The words inside remained folded, quietly pressing against the parchment, their warning unheard. As they neared the theatre of Pompey, Caesar glanced up at the familiar structure. It was grand, with columns rising gracefully against the morning sky. Within the complex stood the Curia, repurposed as a temporary Senate house. Though less ornate than some of the city's halls, it held an air of quiet dignity, its shadowed doorway framed by stone steps worn smooth by years of use. At the entrance, a small cluster of senators had gathered to greet him. They bowed with measured formality, their expressions practiced and serene. Caesar offered a slight smile in return. His movements remained fluid and calm, his posture easy. He did not appear wary. Inside the Curia, the murmur of voices ceased as word reached them. Caesar had arrived. The doors were opened wider. A gust of warm air passed through the chamber, gently lifting the hems of togas and the edges of scrolls left upon the benches. The hall brightened, and then he entered. The echo of his footsteps spread across the marble floor, steady and unhurried. His presence filled the space with quiet gravity. The senators rose as he passed, heads bowed slightly, hands clasped respectfully. Some met his gaze, others did not. He took his place near the central chair, where the scrolls and tablets were arranged for the day's proceedings. There was no tension in his manner, no sign that he suspected anything. Cassius watched from across the room, his expression unreadable. Brutus turned slightly in his seat, his brow smooth, his breathing even. They had agreed not to speak aloud unless necessary. The plan required silence, precision, a slow unfolding. Outside, the sky above the forum remained clear. The scent of warmed stone and laurel leaves drifted through the windows, and the moment settled, quiet and unbroken, like the hush before a summer rain. Everything was in place, and the meeting was about to begin. The stillness in the Curia of Pompey deepened as Caesar seated himself. A small writing table stood before him, its wax tablet already marked with yesterday's notes. A pair of styluses lay beside it, neatly arranged. A thin shaft of sunlight fell through the upper window, striking the floor in a slow-moving beam. Dust motes floated gently within it, their silent dance undisturbed. Caesar rested his hand on the table, fingers relaxed. He spoke a few words to an attendant, asking for the day's schedule. His voice was calm, even warm. There was no hurry. Around him, the senators settled back into their places, their movements deliberate and measured. Nothing about the chamber seemed unusual. No harsh words, no sudden gestures, only the natural pause before official business would begin. Julius Caesar approached, his steps soft on the stone. He carried a folded petition in his hand. It was a request to recall his exiled brother, a matter Caesar had already dismissed. But this morning, Caesar was insistent. He stood close, too close for mere protocol, and held out the parchment with a plea. Caesar glanced at him, a touch of irritation crossing his features. He shook his head gently. The matter had been settled, he reminded him. There was no need to revisit it. But Caesar would not retreat. Behind him, Cassius moved quietly. His eyes flicked from Caesar to the other conspirators. Each man knew his place. Each had waited for this signal. Decimus was near the doorway. Casca was just behind Caesar, his expression blank, his hand resting near the edge of his toga. Then Caesar gripped Caesar's shoulders. It was sudden, too firm for courtesy. Caesar stood, his voice low with confusion, perhaps anger. "Why this violence?" he asked. though the words had barely left his lips before Casca acted. His dagger struck, but the blow was clumsy. It scraped Caesar's shoulder, not deep, but enough to draw surprise. Caesar turned, startled, reaching up as if to push him away, and then the others moved. The scene remained strangely hushed. There were no shouted orders, no cries, only the sound of robes swaying and sandals shifting, of quick, shallow breaths and the soft clash of metal. Each senator closed in with quiet urgency. One by one, their blades emerged from beneath the folds of their togas. They surrounded the man who had ruled them all. Caesar tried to resist at first. He raised his arms, stepped back, sought to turn. But the space was small, the crowd tight, the blows coming from every side. Cassius struck him in the ribs. Decimus moved in from behind. Blood began to fall in thin rivulets onto the marble, mingling with the shadows beneath the laurel leaves. In the confusion, Caesar caught sight of Brutus, and for a moment he hesitated. There were no words recorded with certainty, only whispers passed down over the years. Some said he spoke his name. Others said he remained silent, meeting his eyes for just a moment. The bond between them, once strong, flickered briefly in that still chamber. Then Caesar fell. He collapsed beside the statue of Pompey, his toga stained, his body curved gently against the stone floor. The hall was silent again, except for the slow, uneven breathing of the men who stood over him. Outside, nothing had changed. The sun continued to rise, touching the rooftops of Rome. The pigeons fluttered and settled once more, and the forum hummed with quiet life, unaware that power had just shifted. Unseen, but not unfelt. The silence inside the Curia of Pompey lingered long after Caesar had fallen. No one moved at first. The senators stood frozen in place, their blades still gripped in shaking hands, their faces pale beneath the soft light filtering through the windows. The hall, so often filled with oratory and debate, now held only the faint rustle of cloth and the distant sounds of the city outside. The statue of Pompey loomed above, its stone gaze fixed forward. At its base, Caesar lay motionless, the folds of his toga draped around him like a shroud. A dark stain spread slowly beneath him, following the gentle slope of the marble floor. His sandals, once spotless, now rested in shadow. One by one, the conspirators stepped back. Cassius turned first, wiping his blade against the hem of his robe with careful, almost methodical movements. Brutus lingered longest, standing over the body with a distant expression. His breath was steady, but there was something hollow in his eyes, as though the weight of what had just passed had not yet settled upon him. The others looked to him, but he said nothing. Instead, they began to leave. They moved in pairs or small clusters, robes rustling quietly as they passed through the doors of the Curia. Some paused to look back. Others kept their eyes ahead. The city outside continued as it had before, unaware, untouched. The morning light spilled gently over the paving stones, softening every edge. In the forum, a few passers-by glanced toward the Curia. There had been no great cry, no bell, no alarm. A few senators stepped into the open air with guarded expressions, speaking in hushed tones. One of them, a younger man named Trebonius, offered a vague explanation to a curious citizen before quickly moving on. Inside, Caesar's body remained where it had fallen. The attendants had fled when the violence began. Now, slowly, they crept back into the hall. Two young slaves, eyes wide with disbelief, approached with hesitation. One carried a woolen cloth, the other a small basin of water. Their steps were slow, cautious. They had served him for years. This was not how they imagined the day would unfold. In a shaded corner of the forum, Brutus and Cassius spoke quietly. The breeze moved through the columns, bringing with it the scent of fresh-cut flowers from a nearby altar. They discussed the next steps, how to explain, how to reassure the Senate, how to present the act not as murder, but as a liberation. They used careful words like republic and honor, but their voices were low and their faces tired. Farther away, others dispersed into the city, returning to their homes or to quiet taverns. The streets were still calm, the crowds unaware. Only a few whispers began to spread, that something had happened, that the Senate meeting had ended suddenly, that Caesar had not emerged. By midday, the news would reach every corner of Rome. But for now, the moment remained suspended in stillness. Above the Curia, the sky remained clear and blue. The clouds passed slowly, drifting without hurry, and inside the last of the shadows lengthened. As the sun reached its zenith, the Forum Romanum bathed in soft light. Columns cast long, delicate shadows across the ground, and the flagstones held the warmth of late morning. People moved slowly now, as if the day itself had quieted. Yet within the calm, whispers had begun to thread their way through the crowd. Vendors noticed it first, those who stood near the Senate's meeting place, selling bread or olives from shaded stalls. A senator had emerged earlier than expected, his face drawn, his mouth tight. A pair of scribes had followed, speaking in quick, uncertain Latin. They did not return. A temple priest, pausing at a fountain, leaned toward a magistrate and asked softly if the meeting had been adjourned. The magistrate shook his head, eyes distant, lips parted as if about to speak, but no words came. He merely walked away. Soon, more noticed. Servants carrying scrolls to the Curia found the doors shut and guarded by quiet, solemn figures. The guards offered no explanation, only silent gestures to move along. A boy carrying a delivery basket lingered too long near the steps and was gently but firmly told to go. Within the forum, the low murmur of voices rose and fell like wind through reeds. It wasn't yet panic, just uncertainty, just the early scent of change. In a shaded portico near the temple of Castor and Pollux, a pair of philosophers debated in hushed tones. One had heard from his cousin's neighbour that Caesar had fallen ill. Another believed it was a staged retreat, a message of power. They spoke with careful detachment, their voices low, not wishing to seem involved. Closer to the Curia, a noblewoman in a fine stola paused at a market stall. She asked softly if anyone had seen Julius Caesar. The vendor only looked at her, blinking slowly, before saying he had not seen him since morning. Their eyes met, and though neither said it aloud, a quiet understanding passed between them. Farther up the Palatine, couriers were sent with increasing urgency. Notes scribbled in haste, wax seals still warm, made their way to the houses of senators and equestrians. Doors opened and closed more quickly now. Shadows moved behind curtained windows. Inside the home of Calpurnia, Caesar's wife, the mood shifted from worry to dread. She stood in the atrium, hands clasped, listening to the silence beyond the walls. A slave entered with wide eyes, whispered something, and then fell silent. Calpurnia turned away, walking slowly toward the small family shrine, her steps quiet as falling petals. Meanwhile, the conspirators remained scattered. Some returned home, where they paced marble floors or sat quietly among the statues of ancestors. Others lingered in back alleys or porticos, out of sight but watching, always watching. Their daggers had been cleaned, their robes adjusted. Their minds, perhaps, were not yet settled. Back in the Forum, time moved slowly. A senator's carriage passed, its wheels creaking faintly. A pair of boys chased each other past the Basilica Aemilia, unaware of the day's wait. A bird perched atop a statue of Mars, preening in the sun. Rome did not stop. It never stopped. But something had shifted. The wind had changed. And beneath the calm surface of the city, history was already beginning to stir. As the sun drifted westward and the shadows stretched longer across the Forum, the quiet murmur of the morning began to give way to something heavier. Word had begun to spread, not from an official proclamation, nor from the heralds who usually announced events in the city, but from lips to ears, from glance to glance, carried on the soft breath of rumour and unease. Julius Caesar was dead. The phrase, though whispered, carried a strange weight. It did not stir cries or shouts. It brought instead a stillness, a pause. A fruit seller lowered her basket, resting it gently on the edge of a stall. A mason, midway through setting a stone near the temple of Saturn, paused with his trowel in the air. A boy delivering a message stopped running and stood in the street, the parchment in his hand fluttering slightly. In homes along the Palatine Hill, families gathered quietly. Windows were shuttered. Conversations took on a hushed intensity. In some villas, small groups of men in dark cloaks met behind closed doors, voices kept low, faces unreadable. Others paced open courtyards, seeking answers from frightened slaves or wide-eyed neighbours. In the Subura, the working-class district teeming with life, news arrived more slowly. When it did, it came wrapped in disbelief. The man who had fed them, brought them grain, promised reforms, gone. Many shrugged, some scoffed. But as the hours passed, and more faces turned grim, the truth began to settle like fine dust on the cobblestones. Not far from the capital, Mark Antony stood in his quarters. He had not been in the Curia that morning. Some said by chance. Others whispered it had been planned. Now, he stood by an open window, looking out over the city. His hands rested on the sill, his eyes fixed on the rooftops, unmoving. Inside the Senate house, Caesar's body had been left where it fell for a time. Only later did a few loyal attendants gather the courage to move it. They carried it gently, reverently, wrapped in his toga, the folds soaked and heavy. They took him to his house on the Palatine, where Calpurnia awaited, still silent in the shadows of the atrium. The conspirators had returned to the Forum. They moved with deliberate calm, faces composed. Brutus, in particular, walked with a kind of serene purpose, speaking softly to any who approached. He used words like freedom, the Republic, restoration. He reminded those who listened that Caesar had taken too much, that Rome must belong to no single man. But not all nodded. Some turned away. Some listened but said nothing. Some began to gather near the steps of temples and colonnades, their eyes watchful, uncertain. And above it all, the day continued. The sun softened, glowing now with a golden hue that touched the rooftops and turned the marble walls to amber. The sound of footsteps, carts, and faint conversation blended into the hum of early evening. Birds circled lazily overhead. The air grew cooler, carrying with it the scent of baked stone and distant myrtle. Rome did not weep, it did not rage. It waited, quietly, carefully, the breath before the next movement, the hush between storms, As dusk descended over Rome, the city's golden rooftops softened into a tapestry of warm browns and dimmed whites. The sun slipped low behind the Janiculum Hill, casting the last of its light across the sprawl of the Forum, where columns now stood in long, leaning shadows. The bustle of the day had slowed. The carts grew fewer, the voices lowered. Evening crept in like a gentle fog. On the Palatine Hill, lights were kindled. Small terracotta lamps glowed in the corners of gardens and atriums, their flames flickering against painted walls. The air carried the faint scent of lavender and fig leaves, mingled with the subtle smoke of olive oil burning in bronze lanterns. It was a peaceful scent, one that marked the return to the home, the settling of the day. Within Caesar's villa, all was hushed. His body lay upon a low platform in the atrium, wrapped in fine linens, his toga carefully arranged. Attendants stood nearby in silence, their faces solemn, their hands folded. Outside, a few mourners gathered. They did not speak loudly. They moved slowly, touching the columns or bowing their heads. The soft shuffle of sandals on mosaic floors echoed gently in the stillness. Calpurnia remained within, seated near the household shrine. She had not spoken much. Her gaze rested on the oil lamp flickering at the feet of the household gods. A slave brought her a warm cloth, which she took without a word. The shadows danced across her face as the light shifted, making her expression unreadable. Down in the Forum, torches were lit along the colonnades. A small group of citizens stood beneath the arch of Tiberius, speaking in low tones. They speculated on what would happen next. Would the Republic return? Would Antony respond? Some held small loaves wrapped in cloth. Others clutched their cloaks tighter against the rising evening breeze. The conspirators had withdrawn. They had made speeches in the Curia, then departed quietly. Brutus returned to his home, where friends and allies sat in a circle, drinking watered wine and discussing the day. He remained thoughtful, responding slowly, measuring his words. He had dreamed of this moment, but now that it had come, the air felt heavier than he had imagined. Cassius wrote letters by lamplight, dipping his stylus carefully into a pot of ink. His handwriting was neat, his script precise. Each line was meant for allies across the provinces, to explain, to assure, to warn. In the temple of Vesta, the sacred flame continued to burn. And across the city, the people waited. They sat on doorsteps or gathered in small groups beneath awnings and trees. Some sang softly to their children. Some lit incense. Some simply watched the stars emerge one by one above the hills of Latium. The night was gentle, with a cool breeze and a waxing moon. Dogs barked in the distance. Somewhere near the Aventine, a flute played a slow, wandering melody. The water in the public fountains sparkled faintly in the torchlight, falling in soft, steady rhythms. And through it all, the city did not sleep. It simply held its breath, wrapped in silence, wrapped in shadows. The morning after the Ides of March unfolded slowly, like a heavy curtain drawn back inch by inch. A soft haze hung over the city, catching the early light and muting the outlines of distant rooftops. From the top of the Capitoline Hill, the view stretched in gentle tones. Grey stone softened by golden mist, columns rising like ghostly sentinels, and the quiet movement of people below. In Caesar's home, preparations had begun. The atrium remained hushed, bathed in the calm light of morning. His body had been washed and dressed in fresh robes. His features, once sharp with purpose and command, now rested in stillness. Around him, lamps flickered gently. Laurel branches had been placed nearby. their green leaves a quiet echo of past triumphs. Calpurnia moved through the villa like a shadow. Her steps were measured, her gaze fixed on nothing in particular. She spoke little, but her presence gave shape to the morning. Servants, already trained in the ancient rituals of death, carried out their duties with quiet reverence. They polished bronze dishes, swept the stone floors, and arranged flowers, violets, lilies, and sprigs of myrtle. Outside, Rome was stirring with uncertainty. Antony had begun to assert his role as consul and Caesar's closest ally. He convened with senators and priests, speaking with gravity. His voice, once known for its charm and cleverness, now bore a deeper weight. He promised order. He spoke of unity. But beneath his words, tension lingered. Word of the funeral had begun to spread. Caesar would not be buried privately on the Palatine. The people demanded more. He had been their leader, their reformer, their figure of strength. His victories had filled the city with treasure. His policies had fed the poor. To send him into the earth without honor would not satisfy those who wept for him. Plans shifted. A pyre would be built in the Forum, near the Regia, where Romulus was said to have once ruled. The location held meaning. Here, surrounded by temples and monuments, Caesar would rest one last time among the city he had shaped. Carpenters were summoned to begin work. With gentle hands and solemn hearts, they stacked planks of pine and cedar, laying them carefully atop one another. The wood smelled faintly of sap and sun. As the platform rose, the Forum watched. Citizens paused at a distance, saying little, only standing in quiet reflection. Meanwhile, messengers travelled quickly between estates and temples. The Vestal virgins were consulted. The augurs read the flight of birds and the entrails of sacrificial animals. All signs, they claimed, pointed to unrest, but none could say what form it would take. Brutus remained indoors that day. He declined visitors and spent the morning with scrolls and letters, reading quietly by lamplight. He had not spoken to the crowd. He had not walked through the Forum. Though his friends still called him a liberator, the city's eyes had begun to turn, watching him more closely. The silence, once comfortable, now felt heavy. And still, the day moved on. The sun reached its height and then began to sink again, casting long lines of shadow through the arches and alleyways. Children watched the workers build the pyre. Women brought flowers and tucked them into cracks between the boards. Priests poured oil upon the foundation, chanting softly. In the distance, bells rang from a temple courtyard, and the wind stirred gently through the streets, carrying with it the scent of wood, the scent of morning, the scent of change. The morning of the funeral dawned with a sky veiled in pale clouds. A soft, silver light lay over Rome like a linen cloth, muffling the colours of the buildings and washing the city in a calm, gentle glow. The sounds of the early city were subdued. Even the usual cries of merchants and the clatter of hooves felt more muted, as if all of Rome were holding its breath. People gathered in the Forum long before the procession began. They came in silence, wrapped in cloaks, their expressions solemn. Some held flowers or small votive offerings. Others carried nothing, only the weight of grief. There were old veterans who had marched with Caesar in Gaul, now leaning on worn staffs. There were freedmen and tradespeople, children on their fathers' shoulders, matrons with veiled faces. The crowd grew slowly, spreading around the raised pyre of polished wood, now crowned with laurel and purple cloth. The bier that bore Caesar's body was carried by magistrates and lictors. It was draped in a crimson toga, edged in gold, the folds lined with garlands. Upon his chest lay the civic crown of oak leaves, the corona civica, given to those who had saved Roman lives. His face, visible beneath the transparent veil, appeared serene. The bloodstains on his robes remained, carefully left untouched. Flutes played a slow, mournful tune as the procession passed through the heart of the city. Their notes floated through the air like wisps of incense. Musicians in white tunics moved in time, their melodies echoing softly along the colonnades. A group of women followed, chanting a gentle threnody, their voices rising and falling like waves against a quiet shore. Mark Antony walked behind the bier. His head was bowed. In his hand he held a scroll, Caesar's will. He had not yet read it aloud, but the seal remained unbroken no longer. Soon, the city would know what Caesar had left behind. Whispers already passed through the crowd that he had left his gardens to the people, coin to every citizen. A final gift from a man who had wielded absolute power, yet spoke often of duty. As the funeral reached the forum, the bier was placed upon the pyre with care. The platform rose above the crowd, a quiet mountain of wood and cloth, garland and memory. The smoke of incense rose into the morning air, curling like thread into the sky. Mark Antony stepped forward. He looked not to the Senate, but to the people. His voice was low at first, then grew with measured strength. He did not speak of revenge, not yet. He spoke of Caesar's life, of his battles, his reforms, his mercy. He read from the will. The people listened, silent at first, then stirred by emotion as the words unfolded. Tears welled in the eyes of many. Then, as if moved by instinct rather than order, the crowd surged forward. They brought their own torches. The flames touched the edge of the pyre, catching the oiled cloth, then licking up the beams of cedar and pine. Smoke billowed upward. The fire cracked and breathed. The golden robe caught light and curled into ash. The laurel leaves withered, then glowed. The body of Caesar was surrendered to the flame, carried skyward in rising smoke. The people wept. Some cried out. Others stood in silence, hands over their hearts. The fire rose high, casting warm shadows across the forum, dancing against the marble temples and the bronze faces of statues. The wind carried the smoke across the rooftops, across the Tiber, across the hills. And as the sun climbed behind the haze, the city of Rome watched the passing of a man and the end of something greater. The Republic had lost its center, and in its place, only embers remained. The flames of Caesar's funeral pyre burned well into the afternoon, their glow casting a flickering light over the gathering in the forum. Even as the heat began to wane and the wood settled into glowing embers, the crowd lingered. They stood in silence, watching the smoke rise into the pale sky, their faces illuminated by the soft orange of the fire's final breath. Ash floated through the air like snow, drifting down upon cloaks and curls and garlands left behind. A faint scent of charred wood and oil hung over the city, not unpleasant, but unforgettable. Children reached out to catch the ashes, their laughter subdued by the solemn mood. Elders remained still, their eyes glassy with thought, watching the smoke fade slowly into the west. Among the crowd, many now knelt near the remains of the pyre. They placed flowers and small offerings, coins, figurines, scraps of poetry. Some kissed the ground, some whispered prayers. A woman pressed her hand to her chest and closed her eyes. A man from the Aventine poured wine onto the stones. It soaked in silently. The lictors stood nearby, silent and still. No orders were given, no curfew enforced. Even the city's guards, those tasked with watching the forum, had stepped back. Mark Antony remained at the edge of the crowd, his face unreadable. A few senators had gathered near him, speaking quietly, but his gaze was fixed on the smouldering wood. His mind moved forward, faster than his words. There was something shifting beneath the surface of Rome, and he felt it now like the stirring of wind before a storm. Brutus did not come, nor Cassius. They had withdrawn to their homes, keeping to the quiet and the shadows. Rome had not risen against them, not yet, but neither had it embraced them. The funeral had changed the mood. What was once a measured act of restoration now lingered under suspicion. Caesar had become more powerful in death than he had been in life. As the last of the fire sank into a bed of coals, the priests began to chant. Their voices were low and even, a soft rhythm like the lapping of waves. They carried water in bronze basins, poured it carefully around the stones, blessing the ground where Caesar had burned. The ashes would be gathered, they said, and laid to rest in his family tomb. But the people knew. They would remember this place. Children ran through the forum again by evening, their games returning slowly. The scent of roasted grain and honey drifted from food stalls. Life resumed its patterns, but with a quieter cadence. The bells of nearby temples marked the hour. Torches were lit along the Via Sacra. The sky turned a soft lavender as dusk returned. In the porticos, philosophers debated once more. Would the Republic stand? Would Antony seize power? Could Brutus calm the unrest? The questions had no answers, only more questions, wrapped in careful rhetoric and ancient precedent. And still, the embers of the pyre glowed faintly beneath the darkening sky. A single laurel branch, untouched by the flames, lay at the edge of the stones. A quiet reminder of the man, of the moment, of the end. As the days passed, Rome did not return to normal. It shifted into something new, something quieter and more watchful. The ash from Caesar's pyre had long since been swept away, but the memory of the flames lingered in every marble corridor and shaded courtyard. In the forum, people still gathered in small groups, speaking softly beneath porticos, their conversations drifting like mist. Caesar's will, now read aloud to the people, had stirred more than sorrow. It had awakened something deeper, gratitude, anger, a sense of betrayal. He had left them gifts. Each citizen, rich or poor, was named in his will, promised coin from his vast estate. The gardens along the Tiber were left to the people of Rome, a place to walk, to rest, to gather beneath olive trees. No tyrant, they said, would be so generous, no king so kind. The mood among the plebs began to shift. The conspirators had spoken of liberty, of saving the Republic, but the people had not asked to be saved. They had asked for grain, for dignity, for peace. Caesar had given them those things, and now he was gone. Brutus's speeches, once admired, were now met with lowered eyes. Cassius appeared less often in public. Antony sensed this change like a sailor feels the current beneath a calm sea. He moved among the people with quiet confidence, offering comfort, not orders. He spoke at small gatherings, shared wine in the marketplaces, and honored Caesar's memory without defiance. He did not speak of vengeance, not yet. He only reminded the city of what it had lost. In the Senate, there was tension. Some senators urged reconciliation, fearing unrest. Others stood firmly with the liberators, insisting the Republic must not be handed to one man's memory. But the chamber felt emptier now, its echoes longer, its arguments thinner. The shadow of the Ides of March still hung there. By evening, the city lights flickered once more. Lamps were lit along the edges of the forum. At the temple steps, women offered garlands and incense. The scent of frankincense curled upward into the cooling air, mixing with the aroma of baked bread and the distant sound of water in the fountains. The city was lovely at night, peaceful, even in uncertainty. Along the Tiber, the first families strolled through the gardens Caesar had given them. Children chased fireflies beneath tall cypress trees. A musician played a slow melody on the lyre near a small stone bench. The stars shimmered above the river, their reflection broken gently by the flow of water. And still, the people whispered his name, not with fear, not with sorrow, but with memory, and with something that sounded very much like longing. Rome moved forward, but unevenly. The days after Caesar's funeral brought no clear peace, only a quiet rearranging of allegiances and expectations. The city did not erupt in rebellion, but neither did it accept the death of its leader as a closed chapter. There was a softness in the way the people walked now, a hush in their voices, as if the streets themselves had learned to tread carefully. Brutus remained in his domus, perched high on the slopes of the Capitoline Hill. He received visitors, yes, but fewer than before. His letters to the provinces, to Cicero, to distant allies, carried words of justice and principle. Yet the answers he received grew shorter. The vision of a restored republic no longer kindled the hearts it once had. In the Subura, where the streets coiled tightly between insulae and taverns, the mood was different. The people there did not speak of virtue and Senate debates. They spoke of bread, of coin, of the gardens by the river. They remembered Caesar not as a general, but as a man who had spoken to them from the rostra, who had walked among them unguarded, who had given freely. Antony's presence grew more pronounced. He walked the streets with a practiced calm, visiting temples and marketplaces, always with the air of someone remembering rather than planning. His speeches were gentle, but they were steady, and in each one he reminded the people of Caesar's generosity, his legacy, and the betrayal by those he had trusted most. One evening, as dusk spread its golden wings across the rooftops, Antony stood in the forum once more. The light caught the curve of his face, the edge of his laurel wreath. He spoke of the will again, of Caesar's military victories, of his dreams for Rome. He read lines from letters Caesar had written, filled with plans for new roads, new laws, peace in the provinces. The crowd listened in silence, and then quietly, someone wept. Across the forum, the statues watched without expression. Stone senators and gods looked on as the living world beneath them shifted once again. Near the ruins of the pyre, garlands had been replaced, newly laid by unseen hands. A few citizens lit small candles in terracotta bowls, setting them in a row along the edge of the paving stones. In the Senate, tempers rose. Words were exchanged behind closed doors. Antony's growing popularity unnerved many. A motion was brought forth to condemn his actions, but it was met with hesitation. No one wanted to seem the enemy of the people. The shadows that had once gathered around Caesar now loomed over every chair and every bench in that ancient hall. At night, the sky remained clear. The stars shimmered like coins scattered across dark velvet. From the Palatine to the Aventine, the soft glow of oil lamps flickered behind shuttered windows. Rome, with all its grandeur, all its pride, seemed to shrink inward for a moment, like a breath held too long. There was no war, not yet, but the quiet was growing heavier, and the space between silence and storm grew thinner with each passing night. In the days that followed, Rome waited, not with patience, but with the quiet expectancy of a city perched on the edge of change. The Forum remained busy, yet conversations paused when certain names were spoken. Markets bustled, but the shadows stretched longer, as if time itself slowed to listen. Among the names whispered now was Octavian. The young man had arrived quietly. He was not yet 20, still soft in face and voice, but his name was Octavius Caesar, great-nephew to Julius, adopted son by testament. He carried himself with unassuming grace, his words few, his eyes watchful. He did not challenge Antony directly, not at first. He moved with the gentle force of someone planting roots. In the gardens along the Tiber, where Caesar's will had given peace to the people, Octavian walked alone at twilight. Citizens noticed. They approached him. Some bowed, others only watched. He spoke gently to them, not from a dais or marble steps, but face to face, eye to eye. He did not promise power. He promised memory. The city was divided now, not only between those who praised Caesar and those who had struck him down, but between those who feared the past and those who longed for it. The Senate, once the center of all things, now seemed fragile. Discussions dragged, motions stalled, alliances shifted like sand. In one chamber, Cicero wrote furiously. His letters to Brutus were filled with careful counsel, layered warnings. He saw in Antony the threat of another tyranny. In Octavian, an unknown. The republic, he wrote, must be protected. But the words rang weaker now. The Senate had not defended Caesar, nor had it led the mourning. The people remembered that, and the people did not forget. One morning, a statue of Caesar appeared beside the Temple of Mars. No decree had permitted it. No Senate funds had paid for it. But there it stood, garlanded and polished, with fresh flowers at its base. Some called it illegal. Others said nothing, only bowed as they passed. It was not a monument of marble grandeur. It was simple, but it spoke. Brutus remained hidden. He had written defenses. He had given interviews to poets and historians, but he did not walk the streets. He did not speak at the Forum. His name, once spoken with reverence, now hung in the air with discomfort. Children no longer recited his lineage with pride. They asked instead why Caesar's gardens were now theirs. The city breathed in silence. The Tiber flowed calmly through its banks, touching the edges of gardens and villas, whispering against the stone. Ships arrived from the east, their sails heavy with grain. The bakeries resumed their morning fires. Life continued, but beneath it, a quiet shifting. Octavian walked once more near the Basilica Julia, where marble steps caught the morning light. A few followed him, then more, not with cheers, not with banners, with curiosity, with hope, with memory. A new star was rising, not with thunder, but with silence. And in that silence, Rome listened. The soft winds of spring stirred gently through the streets of Rome as twilight settled once more over the city. The sky glowed faintly above the rooftops, a blend of rose and lavender, slowly deepening into dusk. Oil lamps flickered to life along the Via Sacra, their flames wavering in the breeze like tiny stars called down to earth. Rome had changed, not with a clash of swords, nor the roar of revolt, but with a slow unfolding, like the petals of a flower long kept in shadow. The Republic still stood, on paper, in ritual, in name. The Senate still met. Magistrates still wore the purple-bordered toga. But something old had passed away, and something new had begun to rise. Antony and Octavian now circled each other in a delicate dance. What had begun as partnership had cooled into rivalry. Octavian gathered supporters with calm certainty. Veterans, tribunes, and senators once loyal to Caesar now drifted into his orbit. He moved carefully, spoke softly, and always invoked Caesar's name, not as a weapon, as a memory. In the Forum, statues were restored, inscriptions repainted. The temple steps bore wreaths each morning, placed by unseen hands, and each evening, torches were lit around the place where Caesar's pyre had stood. Some nights people gathered there in silence. They did not shout. They did not pray. They simply remembered. Brutus and Cassius had fled the city. Their hopes for a renewed republic had found no ground to take root. Across the sea, they would gather legions, write letters, and speak of liberty. But in Rome, their absence spoke louder than their words. No monument was raised to them. No temple offered prayers in their names. Within the city, Octavian took careful steps. He restored temples. He praised the Senate. He dined in public without guards. The people, once uncertain, now watched him with quiet admiration. They did not see a boy anymore. They saw something else, something calm, something permanent. The Republic faded not in a blaze, but in a breath. A generation born into its forms now lived in its memory. What remained was ritual. What grew was order. The stars rose slowly over the hills that night. From the Palatine, the golden roofs glimmered in the last of the lamplight. The air smelled of myrtle and cooling stone. The Tiber shimmered beneath the moon, winding quietly beneath the bridges and gardens. Somewhere in the city, a scribe dipped his pen in ink and recorded the day's events. He did not know that the lines he wrote marked the twilight of one age and the dawn of another. And Rome, eternal, watchful Rome, closed her eyes softly, not with mourning, but with stillness and peace. Thanks for watching this far. I truly appreciate you more than you know. If you liked this story, please like and subscribe.